According to Pentagon officials, Russia has fired at least 600 missiles into Ukraine. These are some of them. Cruise missiles hitting a town in central Ukraine. Unlike warplanes and helicopters, they're harder to shoot down, could be fired from long distances away. This far into the war, and Russia still doesn't have full air superiority over the battlefield, according to Western officials. Our next guest wants to take steps to make sure they never do. Illinois Republican Congressman and Air Force veteran Adam Kinzinger joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. You have been calling for backing the idea of a no-fly zone, which is something obviously that the Ukrainian president and Ukrainian officials are really pushing for. I talked to the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Pfeiffer, and he was saying that one major drawback of a no-fly zone, besides the obvious, it provokes potentially direct conflict, of an American plane shooting down a Russian plane. The ambassador was pointing out that in order to protect U.S. and allied planes, they would have to bomb anti-aircraft weapons in Belarus and maybe even Russia itself, in addition to Russian anti-aircraft assets already in Ukraine. Talk to me about your support for the no-fly zone and those arguments against it.
Look, Anderson, there's risk, and I'm not going to deny that, and we should obviously look at that with eyes wide open. But I think there's risk in inaction too at the moment. What I fear in the long term is that if Russia ultimately does take control of Kyiv or all of Ukraine or most of Ukraine, and we wake up every morning and continue to see thousands upon thousands of civilians killed and all these tragic stories, there will be a moment where we decide we have to. And by that time, I think you're significantly in a much more risky spot because much more Russian equipment will be moved in. And I want to be clear, I think there's options. There's a no-fly zone over all of Ukraine. There's Western Ukraine and a humanitarian no-fly zone. I think we've done a lot as the U.S. and our allies, and so this isn't an attack on the response so far. I just fear that we're going to get to the moment where we're going to be compelled to, and we should not fear Russia in that context.
You've raised two interesting ideas, which a lot of people haven't talked about. So I want to actually ask you now about them a little further. One of them, which you just mentioned, is basically kind of an air corridor, humanitarian air corridor that I guess would be, protected by U.S. planes or NATO planes or allied country planes or countries who are willing to, if it wasn't NATO per se. And that would allow the flight of supplies in?
Yeah, so if you think of it similar to maybe like a Berlin airlift, if you can protect a corridor, you can allow planes to fly in, drop supplies, even drop armaments, whatever that takes. If it's a agreed upon one, the Russians have violated, frankly, every attempt to have humanitarian corridors so far. You would limit it to just supplies and medical. But I think we have to look at those different variations of what we can do on a no-fly zone. But I think the important thing is this. The old Soviet Union used to threaten the use of nuclear weapons all the time. If Ukraine ends up defeating Russia, which we all pray for, if you think Vladimir Putin is crazy enough to use nukes against NATO and the West for defending the skies of a sovereign country that invited them to do it, I think we have to be realistic that he may very well just use them on Ukraine if he loses. He's a crazy man. We've done a great job, I think, of standing up to him so far. There's a few more things I'd do, but we need to be prepared. This is a moment where he's not going to go quietly.
You've also talked about the idea of, which you had mentioned previously, about kind of a no-fly zone in the west of Ukraine. I'm in Lviv, which is it's much closer to the Polish border. It's the transit point for hundreds of thousands of people who are fleeing. They come to the Lviv train station. They try to get further west, over to Poland or some of the other countries, Moldova, Romania, and the like. There's even has been talk of, if Kyiv fell, that there'd perhaps be Ukrainian government in charge in Lviv, and that would be the seat of power. What would a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine accomplish?
Yeah, it would be basically that. It would be protecting an area for if civilians need to flee, that they can be protected. It alleviates some of the pressure, obviously, on Europe, who's going to be taking, we've had, 1 million refugees. There's 40-some million people that live in Ukraine. It allows a place, if, God forbid, Kiev does fall, to be able to have that government in exile that you mentioned and continue to train, equip, and support the Ukrainian army as they try to take back the rest of Ukraine. But keep in mind, I think if we get to a point, and this is where we have to remember as we're making decisions today, where we see Kiev fall, or we see, a significant part of Ukraine fall, or God forbid, a defeat of the Ukrainian army, taking back Ukraine is going to be far bloodier than anything we've seen today.
You sit on the Committee for Energy and Commerce. We've heard, a number of people talking about on both sides of the aisle pushing for a ban on Russian oil and gas to the U.S. Do you agree with that idea of a ban, and do you think it's something that actually might happen?
I think it's certainly gaining steam. I think it should happen, absolutely. The American people have to be ready for even higher energy prices. I think, there is an understanding of that this is in essence a small price to pay, particularly if you look at what's going on in Ukraine and you put yourself in their shoes. That's a cost of defending freedom. And we have over, maybe as of today, 700 million some barrels in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's what this is for these moments. I think we have to do it. This is the one thing that Russia actually makes money on, is their energy. And so it may be painful, but I think we absolutely have to ban those imports.